بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This message is intended for any parents who may be raising their children in predominantly English-speaking countries of a, you can say, cosmopolitan and also secular structure and society. And specifically raising those children where you are perhaps a first generation or maybe even second generation immigrant, or not necessarily immigrant, but of uh, origin of outside of that country, origin outside of that country, and um, you are raising your child hoping that they, yes, one, retain their Islamic roots and identity, but specifically this video is for the retention of cultural identity and language of origin. And I thought of this subject because me being a product of that, a child who was born in the United States and grew up in a place where not only Muslims were limited, but my heritage or my cultural identity and language was pretty much non existent. And as the Arabs say, وَبِالضِّدِّ تَتَبَيَّنَ الْأَشْيَاءُ, that through opposites you understand concepts. So a person who grew up, for example, in one monolithic or one homogeneous society of one language, one religion, one culture, when they leave that environment to a place where there are multiple cultures, multiple nationalities, multiple faith backgrounds, and whatnot, then they tend to better understand who they are through the absence of what was in their nation of origin in the land that they migrated to. So first, I want to just show uh, not what your objective should be. As a parent, I'm sure you've known that a long time ago, but how you can effectively achieve your objective of your child retaining his or her cultural identity and language of origin, or language of heritage, mother language, by avoiding pitfalls and you can say parental habits that will not only impede them from achieving that goal, but actually may harm the relationship between the child and parent. So remember, the method is just as important as the objective. And this is me being, of course, a young person, but learning from the mistakes of others. Learning from the mistakes of others. As Allah Azza wa Jal, He said, وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ وَلِيَسْتَبِينَ سَبِيلُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ سَبِيلُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ فِي قِرَاءَةٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained and detailed the signs so that the path of those who are criminals, who in Allah's eyes, in Allah's judgment, so their path could be clear. I'm not here to call you as a listener criminal, but the point is Allah explained their path. Why? So we avoid them. We avoid them. We also make the dua when we ask for the guidance to the straight path. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. We don't just ask Allah for the straight path of those He's favored, but we also ask Him to save us from the path of those He has His wrath, who have earned His wrath, and those who have gone astray. And as the poet he said, عرفت الشر لا للشر بل أوقيه ومن لم يعرف الشر يقع فيه. I learned evil, he said, not for the sake of evil itself, but rather so I could protect myself from evil. And he said, whoever doesn't know evil will fall into it. So one is, I'm going to speak about this, trying to contextualize what your societal or perhaps you can say immigrant community experience may be or may not be like, specifically in the United States. For those listening in other places that understand English, Allahu Alam, I could not say that I could relate to that. But one is in the United States, first and foremost, know whatever culture you came to this land with, you came to this continent with, this has been known as the melting pot, in the sense that by studies of vast, either historians, sociologists, by the third generation after the, grandparent or first ancestor that landed in this continent, or excuse me, country came, by the third generation, there would be no trace of that culture in that third generation great grandchild. There'd be no trace of the mother language, and there are some a lot of times could be no trace of the religion, as some have seen in one generation. Some people can apostate. So that is the norm in America. It doesn't mean uh, it is the constant outcome. There are many exceptions to that rule, and the purpose of this video is to be an exception and not the norm. So know that your child, if they are going to perhaps a public school, a private school, they could be homeschooled, they could be in an Islamic school, that is the norm. That is the norm, that they are going to melt into that society. Um, so, uh, one to avoid, you have to understand before you even try, whether that is talking to them in their language of origin, only exclusively, and not answering in English. Number one, understand what does it take to master a language? What does it take to fully grasp a language? And second, what is the communication you as a parent need to affect or establish, or you can say use, so that your child can fully encompass their language? So, to fully grasp a language at home, no matter how much a parent talks to their child, it is not sufficient for them to grasp a language. It is not possible knowing how rich a language can be. Two is knowing that many parents, I cannot speak for all cultures, but those that I'm familiar with, many parents from certain cultures, they don't have a healthy and you can say robust and encompassing style of communication. Perhaps the only communication between them and their child is what is called amrsin, and as we, if those who are listening in Somali, or in Arabic, uh, يعني الأمر أو الإنذار, that you're just commanding your child, don't do that, or do this, or this should be done at this time, or why did you do that? So as a parent, of course, your authority is your authority. No one is doubting that or challenging that. But understand there are levels of communication. No matter how young your child is, don't underestimate the capacity of that child to learn from you. Why? Because you think the first and foremost objective is to instill perhaps intimidation or fear or quote unquote respect in their eyes. There is no one more worthy of respect than the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alayhim wasalam. If you look in the Quran, even though their children were very young, they had very high levels of communication with them that was outside of simply giving them commands. So for example, if you look between Yusuf alayhi salam and Yaqub alayhi salam, Yusuf alayhi salam told his father that he saw the dream. Number one, this is a sign Yusuf alayhi salam felt comfortable to confide in his father. Some children, because of the bad habits of their father or parent, even though that parent can say, I didn't mean to, they don't trust their parent to talk to them. Why? Because every time they talk to their parent, they're going to get scolded, they're going to get cursed, they're going to get yelled, as if the existence of that child is nothing but a burden. But Yusuf confided in his father and told him at that tender age, يا أبت إني رأيت في يا أبت إني رأيت أحد عشر كوكبا والشمس والقمر رأيتهم لي ساجدين. The dream, as we know, I'm sure no one needs explanation, but look at the response of his father. قال يا بني لا تقصص رؤياك على إخوتك فيكيدوا لك كيدا. Oh my son, oh my dear son, don't relate your dream to your brothers so that they may have a plot on you. He didn't just say don't tell them. Why? Because you have to understand, this is another topic. A child, in order to build good judgment and human development, they just don't need rules. Even though they're young, they're going to think why. If you're not capable of explaining it to their age, do not think that that question of why is something negative, because that is what's going to lead them to being adults and having good judgment. So he said don't, because they're going to have a plot against you. إن الشيطان للإنسان عدو مبين. He taught his young child that even if his brothers have a plot against him, Shaitan is the bigger enemy. Shaitan can use your positive dream for a reason to create a rift between you and your brothers or our family. And he continued, he said, وَكَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ. He's giving his son bishara. Some cultures, they think to say anything good to their child is going to lead to ujub. And wallahi, this is from jahl. This is from pure ignorance. That they can give that child every insult that is in the dictionary and not in the dictionary, and they think there's no reason that would harm them out of ignorance. One positive affirmation. It's not praise, you know? It's one positive affirmation. To take another point, the Prophet ﷺ was sent with two main titles. Allah, he said, Bashiran wa Nadhira. Bashiran wa Nadhira. The Prophet came to give glad tidings. He didn't just come to warn people. Even though he's sent to the apex of Jahili and society, the Arab, but he still gave glad tidings. So coming back, he said, وَكَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ وَيُعَلِّمُكَ مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْحَدِيثِ. Thus your Lord will select you and he will teach you the interpretation of dreams. Imagine Yusuf doesn't know the interpretation of his dream at that moment, and he's a young boy. But he said, Allah will teach you the interpretation of dreams. ويتم نعمته عليك ويتم نعمته عليك كما أتمها على أبويك من قبل إبراهيم وإسحاق إن ربك عليم حكيم. Say that Allah will complete His favor upon you. Allahu A'lam, Islam, Tawheed, Prophethood, like He did on your forefathers, Ibrahim and Ishaq. Indeed, your Lord is the All-Knowing, the Most Wise. So look at this. This is not interpretation, but to understand that I was coming back to communicating beyond the scope of just giving commands. Do this, don't do this. You did wrong, you, etc. To have a dialogue with your child where they feel safe around you, and you also are listening to them according to what is their interest. You cannot treat a child outside the scope of his or her age. You have to understand their level. And you also engage with them. Okay. So also another point that comes to mind is, not before grasping the language, is the language is intertwined with the identity of that person, in the sense that in whatever society, a language could be spoken by a wide, vast number of ethnic backgrounds. But part of that language, it being something of the heritage of that child who may be first or second generation or whatnot, is knowing their origin, knowing their heritage, knowing their ancestry. So I don't want to go out of order, but I'll come back to this subject inshallah later. So, in order to grasp a language, it is beyond the scope of a parent just giving commands to their child. Now, as much as a parent talks to that child, one thing to focus and understand is that child is going to understand their identity not just inside the house of that parent. When they go to school and they observe society around them, whatever other ethnicities are there, and based off how the ethnicities view that child. A child is a child. A child, if they are going to be bullied for their identity and they are too young for, perhaps, to understand that the children that are bullying me don't know better, they have no fadl, they have no virtue over me, etc., etc. All these slurs and insults and bigotry and racism and unwelcoming culture of immigrants and whatnot. They're too young for that. But understand that child, no matter how much their identity is enforced at home and taught so that they have confidence, that confidence is not fully going to get to its level until they go through that experience of whatever society is they live around them. So the child's identity is a conception and a perception. Or they say race is a conception and a perception. Yes, race is a term that is a social construct. It doesn't have a biological origin, right? Like, certain, culture, not just cultures, but not even nationalities, but those who trace their heritage through tribes and whatnot, you can find through biology what differentiates them. But race is a social construct. There's nothing biology in the human body that is going to affirm or establish this. Race is a structuring structure. However, it is a concept, a conception, and a perception. What does that mean? Conception is one thing, I think I am this. However, in society, there is a perception of who are these people that I perhaps believe I am. So the point is that this child do not feel that because what you taught them at home, what you spoke to them at home about their heritage is the entire plot or the entire objective. They are going to go through peaks and valleys, hills and valleys, or in their experience, be it elementary or middle or high school or college or whatnot. However, to build that identity, I would say if those who are not open to the idea, perhaps some are open to the idea, but if you're not open to the idea, that child needs to go back to their land of origin, not just once or twice, but for an extended period of time and at different parts and stages of their life for them to be able to fully perceive who are my ancestors, where are my parents or grandparents from, who am I? Who am I? Because in America, again, if you're listening in another country, I'm sorry, I cannot perhaps do the right, fairness and justice to the subject. But in America, understand, at one point, I don't know how much it's changed now. Out of all of American citizens, only 10% held a passport. Only 10%. Meaning, if you are of that 90% that has no passport, you do not even have access to, to go to another land and actually see the world. And those 10% that had a passport, what percentage of them are going to parts of the world that perhaps uh, much injustice has been done and much distortion of their history has been told in the media for them to go out and see what the reality is. A lot of people in America that have a passport just want to go to vacation, sightseeing, and live the same uh, vacation lifestyle they do in America, and that probably is going to eliminate a lot of the world. So the point is, when that child goes to their place of origin again and again, and they go through stages of their life, their realization is going to be different. And that will also reinforce their identity, their heritage, and their language. Their language. Because even those that speak the language, for example, in immigrant communities where there's a large presence of that culture, nationality, and ethnicity and language, when you go back to the country of origin, it's two different worlds. It's two different worlds. It's not the same. Another point I would like to, and I realize this may not be a lot of parents' interest or even you could say objective, but beyond oral narration of what happened in their country and perhaps what led to independence or what was the presence of that country in a global scale before imperialism, before colonialism, after independence, perhaps border politics, whatnot. Beyond the oral tradition, if you as any person that holds, you know, I wouldn't say pride, but they have thiqatun nafs. They have a strong sense of worth, a strong sense of self, um, about their origin that does not lead to fakhr. Fakhr, remember, is something that is not allowed no matter what is your heritage. As the Prophet ﷺ said, Ana Habibullahi wa la fakhr. Or Ana Khalilullahi wa la fakhr. I am the friend, the beloved of Allah, and I don't boast about that. However, the point is, if someone has thiqatun nafs, strong sense of worth and confidence, that is not making it to the point where they believe they have superiority over others based off of that, or inferiority to that, but in a sense that they don't have an inferiority complex that I'm less than these people. That should be based on knowledge. Knowledge of what? Of who their ancestors are. And that has to come beyond oral narration, right? It should be come through something documented. Read the history of your people from beyond a colonialist or an orientalist narrative, right? One concern that I have, and I can't say I know what the presence is, but now, it being perhaps 6 decades more or less from many of the independence, you know, anniversaries of many lands in the global south, as they call, and the less of those who witnessed that and lived that are living now because they are passing away slowly. The generation that lives after them, perhaps Gen X and Millennial, uh, the fact that they, one, didn't live in that country if they're from an immigrant background, and then two, they don't really have the interest to read about that, then a lot is going to be missed, a lot is going to be distorted, and you can never supplement that, no matter what you say, because nothing builds certainty like knowledge. Nothing builds certainty like knowledge. So anyway, coming from this tangent, we talked about that language, in order for it to be grasped, is beyond what is heard in the home. In the home, there should be communication that is above giving commands, and then that child is going to build their identity by a conception and a perception, who they know they are, and going out into society, and not going out to society just believing blindly what they're going to say, but it either reinforces or makes them question certain elements. And then for that child to build their identity, they should go back to their country of origin. Hopefully, you know, they're not inhibited because of it being war torn. Because a lot of people going back to their country, sometimes it's off the table. It's not an option because of danger and violence. And then going at different stages in their life. For example, high school vacations, beyond maybe just getting a part-time job, or you know, and earning living, what's it called, minimum wage and whatnot. I think one thing that will really build that child, and this is someone who did not get that opportunity, and I'm thankful to Allah, but one thing that will build that child's confidence, identity, and many other things, is if they were to go in their summer vacations in their teenage years and visit their land of origin, visit their family, ancestors if they're there, visit those people, and beyond just finding, you know, leisure and comfort, which alhamdulillah, much of the global south is a less stressful environment than here in the West or in America. But they can go with an objective and say, in this amount of months, I want to, for example, learn to read my language of origin in its original script, if I can. Or I want to learn how to, for example, translate from my language of origin to the language that they speak, for example, English. Or I want to learn how to write my language of origin. Or you know, every society has, for example, laureate scholars, and if they can have access to them from their family network and go and learn about them, this is something that will build their confidence. You know, because America, for example, is 25% of the world's population. Sorry, they're 5% of the world's population, but they use over like 30% of its resources. So they unfortunately take the resources of the world, and based off of wealth and GDP think they're superior than others. But we know how humiliating a lot of people in this country are. Okay, So going back to the language, and if I can share one story without mentioning their identity that can reinforce this, that I know personally a friend of mine who is of Palestinian origin, and he aspired after his, undergraduate studies to go to law school. As you know, in law school, you have to write like a statement of purpose, who you are, something unique. So he thought of this years before, and we all have seen what the oppression of Palestine against Palestine and its people have been for so long. But he went specifically with an objective where he sat in the courts that are administered by Israelis who are judging quote unquote Palestinian prisoners. They did no crime, they're hostages, they're just kidnapped people. And he wrote and documented while he's in that court the the lack of evidence, for example, the lack of due process of law, the lack of representation to a legal defense and whatnot, and how so many people went through that court system and were shortchanged. And that was his statement of purpose. And Allah blessed him. He got into one of the best law schools in the country and alhamdulillah graduated and practiced. So what I'm saying is that objective to him perhaps was beyond his graduate school. It's his people. His homeland. It's his identity. It's his heritage, and he's against oppression against any people, but more specifically if it comes close to home. So these experiences, what I'm saying is, don't think the child is gonna, or not child, but if they're an adolescent or young adult, they're gonna miss out on their worldly opportunities here, or a class they could take, or a job they could get. There's things beyond that. This took a little longer than I wanted, but to finish the other points that I had in mind was that language is beyond the scope of speech. So if you want your child to master their language, another thing that comes to mind, that child, if they do not have peers meaning others their age, their you can say uh, their level of maturation and development in life. If they do not have peers who share their cultural identity, then no, it's gonna be a lot less. Uh, it's a lot less likely for them to master that language the same way, because a child gets confidence by finding peers that they can relate to. Even if they're skilled in the language at home, if that child has friends they can practice that language with outside, and especially they're going through young years when they're very uh, they they like to imitate others and what they see, they have those friends that speak that language, that child is gonna probably speak that language way better if they did not have those friends. So I would say if you are parents or your child doesn't have peers of the immigrant background, be it second, third generation, whatnot, and they don't have peers they can relate to, I would say take your foot off the gas pedal as much. Take your foot off. What does that mean? Expecting from them to master it, fine. And I'm gonna do this little segment in Somali. I cannot do a entire video in Somali, and inshallah I'll just summarize according to those rules. Dadka ay moodayaan dadka ay moodayaan waa qasab inuu wiilkaygii ama gabadhaydii inay luqadeed barto, luqada af Soomaali haddii ay qurbaha joogaan, iyo xataa hal goor ma khaldami karo, xataa hadal ha noqdo, qoris ha noqdo, akhris ha noqdo. أولا waa su'aal inantan ama inankan caruurtan dhalinyaradan ayay luqadan ka baranayaan. Waa inay bashar ka barta somaha. Xayawaan kama barani karan, gidaar kama barani karan, cirka kama barani karan, dhulka kama barani karan. Waa inay bashar u baran. Laakiin basharkaas, waalidkaas, qofkaas ama da'weyn, naag, rag ha noqda, luqada haddii ay aqoonsan yihiin waa kow. Laakiin laba, macallin waa inuu garto maaha bas macluumaadka mawduucka uu baryo, laakiin waa inuu gartaa usluubta. Yani af Soomaali kelimadda muxuu yahay, wasiiradda af ingiriisi waa la sheega method waa inuu garta wasiiradda sidee uu fahamsiini karo qofka uu baryo mawduucka. So kow waa kaas. Laba, inantaada, wiilkaaga, caruurtaada haddii ay ku nool yihiin meel oo bulshad la-aan, yacni society, haddii aanay community ay leeyihiin oo luqadaas la wadaagi karaan, ogow wiilkaaga, gabadhaada markay gurigaaga ka baxan cid ay luqadaas la baraarujini karaan oo la hadli karaan oo la wareysani karaan ma jiro. So since I was saying before, I'll go back to the translation for those who are not listening. To take your foot off the gas pedal in intensity for your child to master the language of their origin when they don't have any peer age group that they can practice with. Remember that. You understand? It's like, for example, you are putting pressure on someone to master entrepreneurship, a business in that entire place, not one person practices. You understand? So the segment I was mentioning before in the Somali language was that if a child is expected to learn a language, they have to learn that language from a human. They're not going to learn that language from an animal, from the sky, from the earth. They're not going to learn it from inanimate object. They have to learn from a human. And the human who is teaching them, even if they know that language 10 out of 10 perfectly, a teacher is not effective by just knowing the subject. Poll any classroom, any age group, even in college. Majority of students say the most effective teacher is not the one who knows the subject most, is the one that can connect with their students the most. And I've learned this firsthand as a continuing educator and have been an educator. So knowing the subject alone is not enough. You have to know the method and the approach to get that child to answer. So that was a summary of what the question was. So one suggestion was to go back to their land of origin as much as possible. If it's not financially feasible, may Allah make it easy, I understand. But if it is on the table, before leisure and enjoyment and complacency, and for example, them wasting their summer going playing video games and going to movies and I don't know, whatever else the youth are interested in, that this is something they will never get back. And understand, even if it comes later in life, the amount they achieve when they understand that identity, language, place of origin, and when they understand that and they come back, they can educate a lot of people, right? They educate a lot of people. And then second, if they miss that at that age, even if they attain it at a later age, it's not the same. It's not the same. The other suggestion is the language is beyond giving commands. So if you have to educate yourself on reading books to learn communication with parents, then learn that. One is better for you, and you're fulfilling your amana to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because these childs are amana, they are a gift. And then make that communication beyond giving commands. For example, teach your child the alphabet, the script of your language. Children love to read. If your language has children's books in their language, like home origin, that is a great gift. That is a great gift, because I can speak from being of a heritage and a language where for the last 30 years, very little literature has been written as a scale on society, on the diaspora, and then second, especially for children. So if you have access to that, alhamdulillah, now there are children's books that are good and effective. By what I have seen, Somali adults who grew up in, you can say in the West, and wrote books targeting for children that are growing up now. So teach them the script of that language so they can read. Practice with them. Go over it. The way you find a teacher for the child to learn the qaida, alif, ba, ta, and the tajweed, do that with your language and give them literature that they can read. And then third, if they can get to a higher level of language, is writing. Writing is you can say, apex of communication. Writing is the apex of communication. To express an idea through speech is very limited, but through writing is a very high level. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And then the last thing was to find peers. If they don't have that, find peers in their area or other areas of their cultural identity and heritage where they originate from, and to speak that language with them. That is something that is going to reinforce that child's identity. Because if you look at perhaps the bullying that happens to ethnic minorities or religious minorities, a lot of times those doing the bullying, they come from the majority culture. They're not standing as a monolith, as the only person from that culture that is thinking that other ethnicity or religion is inferior. I'm not justifying bullying just because they're the majority. What I'm saying is that when those, as they say, united we stand, divided we fall, when those youth are surrounded by other youth they can relate to in their identity, in their culture and language, then they go far beyond. Allah Ta'ala knows best. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. There's really little opportunity to discuss this in a live audience, as I see people usually give their attention and focus to things that are a higher priority regarding Islamic teaching or whatnot. But if there is an opportunity, I wish I could have learned from those parents and hear from them, because I'm sure they have seen challenges beyond that, beyond what I have said, and Allah knows best. And we'll conclude where Allah Azza wa Jalla mentioned, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالِمِينَ وفي قراءة للعالمين. Allah, He said, from His signs, this is a sign of Allah's existence and His greatness, is the creation of the skies and the earth, and the differences in your languages, dialects, and also your complexion and skin, the color. Indeed, verily, in those are signs for those of knowledge, or for the alameen, those besides Allah, of the human, jinn, and malaika, and Allah knows best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.